With the internal loan that you're doing to deal with the GTA pooling, I believe at another meeting, Mr. Rossini, you said that the interest costs that we're going to be paying are about $8 to $9 million in order to accomplish that?
That's correct, yes.
Now, that's just self-borrowing, but does that represent either the foregone revenue from investment interest or the cost of borrowing that we're going to have to, is it notionally tied to one of those?
Yeah, so what we've used is we based it on 1.5%, which is about a 6-year borrowing rate for us. If we were
I understand the rate. What I'm saying is because we're having to take that money out of our capital reserve, we're either going to have to debenture more to backfill it to pay for programs, or we're going to lose investment and interest income if it had been sitting in a reserve. So is it expected that that 8 or 9 will cover off whichever of those costs it is?
So the beauty about the plan that we've put together is if we were to have borrowed it to an external agency, that would be money leaving out.
That's not the question I asked. I'm trying to be very precise.
We're borrowing it from our investments. We're actually going to make that money in our investment pool.
I understand, but because that money is not available sitting in the reserve as it normally would be, but is instead backfilling operating costs, we no longer will be receiving interest on it sitting in a reserve account.
No, we will be receiving interest because we're using it from our investment portfolio, and those returns in the investment portfolio, parts are paid to the reserves and parts are paid to the operating budget itself.
I appreciate that. And the portion that's paid to the operating budget, about $60 million, well, no, because you found 20 in savings, so about 65 million actually will be spent on operating programs, so it won't be sitting in an account. Am I correct in that?
Correct. So we're backfilling.
So there is a foregone. So there is a foregone revenue from investment interest return on those accounts.
No, because that money would have been there in the portfolio, and we're investing it. We're borrowing from the portfolio from ourselves, so that portfolio is still going to be earning that money.
So we're both going to be earning interest on the money and spending it on operating programs. Is that what you're saying?
We're taking money, instead of leaking it out and paying it to a bank or the provincial loan, we're paying it to ourselves.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to understand if you're accounting for it once or twice. No, we're spending it on operating programs because we have an operating.
There is no operating impact on us, other than the 1.7 that we've put out.
Counting it twice.
All right. Thank you very much, Councillor Perks. That would take us next to Councillor Layton.
I'm going to continue on that for just a moment, because I don't think we're getting a perfectly straight answer here. The money in reserves is typically invested.
You know, I don't know what the rules are around here, and we get into a bit of a dust-up at council about this, but I would just ask you to perhaps reconsider the use of "we're not getting a straight answer." I think that's...
Fair enough. My apologies. I don't think we're getting a clear enough answer then, because I'm still confused here. Typically, we would take our reserves, we would invest them, and have a return of a couple percent depending on the length of term of the investment.
That's correct.
Correct. Now we would be taking that money from reserve and putting it into our operating budget.
No.
Then how is that operating piece being funded?
We're not taking monies out of the reserve into their operating budget. We are reducing the CFC, capital from current, by $60 million, which reduces the tax levy by that amount, but it makes up for the loss in revenue from the provincial. Then we are going to borrow more in the capital budget. And instead of borrowing it in public markets, we're going to borrow it from ourselves. That money in our investment portfolio, we have about $5 billion that we invest. We would have invested it anyway.
Yes. So, and this is, I think, the key here that Councillor Perks was trying to get at, is we would have been investing it anyway. So rather than invest it in the market and get a return from the market, we're investing it for our capital from current, which is then we're paying back with interest.
Correct.
The question there was, what's the difference between the interest revenue that we would have been receiving on the, let's call it the market, and the interest revenue we're giving, and that's where I think where Councillor Perks was.
So that's a good question. We're actually going to be making money on it, because we're going to borrow it from we have a long-term portfolio and a short-term portfolio. Right now, if that short-term portfolio was investing in bankers' acceptance notes or short-term bank notes, it would make about 1%.
But that's not the
We're going
number.
to borrow it from ourselves and pay that short-term
Mr.
portfolio.
CFO,
Let me finish.
that wasn't the
1.5.
But that wasn't the answer we were given at Budget Committee when they said the reserve, the revenue from our investments was quite a bit higher than the 1%.
So when you mix in the short-term portfolio and the long-term portfolio, yes, our returns are like in the plus 4% range.
So then,
We have
just,
two sets of portfolios.
just
here.
as a final question, why don't we do this more often? If there, like, what's the downside to this? And that why don't we do this for every investment we have possibly can make? Why don't we do that?
Because we don't have enough money to do it for all our borrowing. If you notice in Josie's presentation, we're going to be borrowing about $4.8 billion over the course of 10 years. This is not the only time where we're borrowing for ourselves. Our Energy and Environment Capital Program has about $150 million through the 10-year piece of internal borrowing. We have done that. We've done some loans to outside organizations borrowed from internal funds. So we have done it before, tied to specific capital programs or tied to loans to agencies. This is the first time where we're doing it in this kind of a situation.
All right. Thank you very much, Councillor Layton. That would bring us to Councillor Davis.